Thank you for joining me at Liz at Home. I'm sharing a watercolor painting I'm doing today. First, the materials, a flat brush, reasonable size. Next, I'm going to be using a size 2. This is just a Princeton snap brush, a little round watercolor brush. Any size 2 would be fine. Next, I'm also using a waterproof marker, fine liner, any type, and then a large flat brush for doing a wash to start with. Then I'm using Prima, the Classics paints, and I use the pink, the red, and the orange of them. I'm also using 2 jars of clear water, and I'm using my Fabriano watercolor sketchbook. So to start with, I tape off an area with masking tape, and I take the tape a little bit around the edges to try and stabilize the book so that I can lift it up when I want to. If it was just a piece of paper, then I would tape it to a board, but I often do that with this book and just tape around the corners a little bit. So I'm just taping off a random area. I didn't want to do the whole page. I've been inspired to do this particular painting by a Skillshare class I'm doing. It's called 30 Brilliant and Beautiful Skies by Art by Z, I think her name is. I've forgotten now. I'll share her name underneath. This is not one of the class lessons we've done, but it's definitely inspired by the classes we're doing. So I take my large brush and I use clear water to just wet the background, as I'm going to be doing a wet on wet technique to start with the background. And I'm having a look to check that there are no puddles on the background, and then I wait a little bit for the water to soak in, and I activate my watercolor paints. And using my flat brush, I first start with the red, and I want this to be quite a thick, vibrant mixture. So whereas I would normally wet a bit of the paint and put it into a palette, here I'm going straight from this palette onto the paper, and I'm loving this rich, vibrant red color, and just using a diagonal way, and then rinsing my brush and drying off a bit of it to try not to water the paint down too much. Now onto the pink, and doing that through there. It's almost like an opera pink, but it's maybe got a little bit more purple to it than an opera pink has. I then had a little bit of a problem because I noticed these black streaks coming and I couldn't understand what was happening. I eventually found out that I had been using black gouache in my water rinsing jar, and there was a little bit on the edge that I hadn't washed off properly. So I struggled a little bit here, but then I got that off. And if you see what I'm doing, I'm actually working the paint too much. Do as I say, not as I do in this particular instance. It's interesting. You all know I'm very much a beginner at watercolor, so it's interesting for me to watch something I've filmed, because I can see, compared to watching a teacher, that they don't work it as much. Now there was again some of that black gouache on the orange, and so it came out a little bit dark, not quite what I had envisaged. And I then finally went to my clean water and tried to mix the two together there. It's not a train smash because we're going to be using a nice silhouette, and actually, in truth, I should have just left it as it is right now, but you know, I didn't. So this is what I'm doing. It worked out fine in the end. So I left that to dry and I'm now drawing 2 palm trees. I looked on Google for palm tree silhouettes and found sort of shapes to give me an image to copy, and I'm just drawing them very lightly in pencil. Next, I'm mixing up my black gouache. I'm using gouache because it's very nice and opaque, and so it's perfect for making the silhouettes. And just adding a bit of water to the gouache. There is already some on the palette, but it's dried, so I want to kind of get that activated as well. And then I'm still finding it quite difficult drawing fine lines, so I always practice a few on a little scrap of paper before I actually touch the paper, and I get a bit anxious, I must admit, before I do these fine lines. I'm so scared that I'm going to mess things up. I like this little paintbrush, it has quite a nice point, and I'm drawing my trunk of my palm tree. Don't want it to be too thin, and I want to try and make the little kind of protuberances, it's quite a difficult word to say, that come out on the sides of it so that it's not a smooth trunked palm tree. We're on holiday at a holiday resort at the moment, and there are many palm trees around here, and some have smooth trunks and some have the little, they almost look like, I don't know, seed pods or something that come out of them. So I found when you're doing the palm leaves, I'm very dyslexic, and so I always find shapes and making things go in the right direction quite a challenge. And somebody said with palm leaves, make sure they always point towards the tip of the leaf. And this has been a great thing for me to think about when I'm painting them. So I'll just speed this up a little bit while I'm painting the rest of my palm leaves, and I'll put a small bit of music on for this. So now I'm actually very happy with my palm trees, and I've decided with this kind of festive looking sky that I'm going to give the people a beach party, and so I'm putting some fairy lights up, and I've just drawn 2 lines with my pencil to try and give me a guide, and now I'm using the fine liner pen, and I'm doing little marks along with the pen, and these are going to be markers sort of like where the lights go on to. I don't know what they're attached to, but luckily that's the joy of a painting. It's all left to the imagination. And this was very soothing to do, I must say. It was great fun to do this painting. And I love painting silhouettes because they're kind of quite forgiving. Excuse me, please. Then I debated about whether I should draw a 3rd line or not, and I put one in. And the jury's out. I can't decide whether I'm happy with it or not, but it is what it is. So I ummed and ahed about where to put it, and then finally added a 3rd line of fairy lights. To make the fairy lights, I used some fairly watered down gouache to make little ovals on those little posts that I'd done on the strings, and I wanted the gouache to be fairly watered down, and I allowed that to dry, and then I went in again with some thicker gouache, and I used, well, I first tried thicker gouache and then I didn't like that so much, so I used a Derwent paint pen, and that was leaking, so I used the paint from it with this very fine little brush to do a little dot of more opaque paint right in the middle of that little oval. So you've got the watered down gouache looking a bit fuzzy around it, which kind of gives a lovely glow to the fairy lights. And within that, we're nearly finished our fairy lights, and we have to leave them all to dry, and then our painting is done. Except, of course, for the nice and exciting moment of removing that masking tape. I love this, although I always have my heart in my mouth in case the paper breaks. So I'm always quite careful, but look at that fabulous crisp edge. Oh, I love it when that is nice and clean like that. So next one. I do find that if I use my finger a little bit next to the masking tape, it seems to help stop the paper from tearing. There's nothing worse than having done a nice painting and then masking tape rips your paper. So nearly finished, and then we can have the great reveal of the finished painting. I'd really recommend that you give this one a try. It was such fun to do, and if you've enjoyed it, then also have a look at Skillshare and have a look at the class that I told you about. It is fun. If you'd like more information on Skillshare, ask me, and I can share a code for you to get 2 weeks for free of a premium subscription. So there we have our final painting, a party under the palms. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to the channel. Bye-bye now.